Okay.
Thanks everybody for joining. Tom, over to you.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm Tom Smith. I'm one of the directors in the Border and Protocol Delivery Group, and we also have on the line some colleagues of mine. So we have Ian Pursglove from DEFRA, we have David Vallely from HMRC, and we have Matt David Keane and Alan Brundle from the Border and Protocol Delivery Group, as well as Kyle Dunkley, who is doing the amazing job of making all this work technically. Next slide, please, Kyle. So we were set up in 2017. Initially, we were kind of under the banner of HMRC, but not part of HMRC. Then, because he was taking such a close interest and because it seemed like a cross-cutting function, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster asked for us to be moved into the Cabinet Office, and it was decided that that was what should happen. So we are the cross-cutting unit that runs that is responsible for the border as a whole, both in terms of the end of the transition period and looking forward to the longer term future for the border. Next slide, Carl. And this is necessary. This was felt to be necessary after we started planning for to implement the result of the referendum, precisely because the government's presence at the border is shared between so many departments and agencies who are listed on that slide there. There's a lot of us. Next slide. Next slide, please, Carl. So the aim of today is to talk a bit about the overview of the changes that are coming from the 1st of January. We will, as it says, we will answer as many of your questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Now, just to manage your expectations, two things that we are not going to be able to answer. Firstly, if you have a constituent who has a very detailed technical question about how a particular shipment will need to be moved, then what we're going to be doing is linking you up after this event with the addresses of helplines and the government online forums. So we will know some of the answers, but we probably won't want to get into the technical detail and at risk of giving an answer that might be wrong for your constituent. Nor, I'm afraid, am I going to be able to tell you any more than you can read in the media about when the negotiations on the free trade agreement with the EU will end and what the outcome will be. I mean, all I can say is that the government will announce that when we know what the answer is. So just to ask something that I should have said right at the beginning. For those of you who haven't used this before, there is a question and answer function on the call. So if you click on it, Kyle, is it the one that looks like a question mark on the screen to the guests as well?
That's right. Yes. There's a Q&A function. There should be a speech bubble with a question mark. I will demonstrate where that is now. Bear with me. Perfect. You should now have a notification, and you should be able to find the Q&A function.
Brilliant. So at any time, feel free to put questions in. We will pick them up and we will answer those questions that we're able to give immediate answers to here today. What I would also find incredibly helpful is if you could just test this out by writing a question which says your name, which member of parliament you work for, which constituency. That would just be really, really helpful for us to kind of get a sense of who we've got on the line. Thank you. Next slide, please, Kyle. So we'd hoped to have a colleague from the transition task force from the Cabinet Office with us. Unfortunately, they may be running into technical problems. But as I said, I think what they would have said is what I said is that the negotiations are ongoing. We are working very hard for a deal, but ministers have been very clear about the UK's red lines, and I won't get into a sort of word games about the the likelihood of a negotiated outcome or non-negotiated outcome, because I don't think that would be helpful. Next slide, please, Kyle. But the point I did want to make, that leads very neatly onto it, is that whether there is a negotiated outcome or not, key message that we are looking to get out to the businesses and to the country as a whole is that for a while it's been clear that we are going to be leaving the single market and the customs union from the 1st of January, and that has certain consequences that will be the case whether or not we have a free trade agreement with the EU. So in particular, customs declarations and other regulatory requirements associated with moving goods across the border. So it's been vital for us to get across this message to people that if you are trading with the EU from the 1st of January, this will be relevant to you. Next slide, please. Earlier in the year, of course, we also had the onset of COVID, and as a direct response to COVID and how we recognised that this was having an impact in particular on the UK business community, whereas we had planned to introduce full import controls on EU goods, which would have been the same as import controls on rest of the world goods, these are now being introduced in stages, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But that is just what we control. We are working on the assumption, and we believe this will be the case, that the EU will be imposing full customs controls on the 1st of January. So we are doing what we can to take a pragmatic approach and mitigate the transition in a couple of weeks' time. But everybody has to work on the assumption that there will be EU customs and related controls from the 1st of January. And this has consequences for what businesses will have to do. Next slide, please. So from the 1st of January, in terms of imports, as I said, we will not be demanding that customs declarations are submitted immediately, but in order to comply with international rules, we will be requiring people who take advantage of this 6-month delay, nevertheless, to make an entry into their records of all of the information that would be needed for customs declaration, so that then they can make the supplementary declarations 6 months later. And that would include so that people will be able to pay applicable tariffs, if there are tariffs on goods from the EU at the end of the 6-month period. And this also will apply to safety and security declarations. These will not be needed for 6 months. Next slide, Kyle. So, but as I said, the majority of controls will then come in on the 1st of July. Next slide, please. But exporting, in order to comply with WTO rules, then UK traders will need to make an export declaration moving goods to the EU, and this will have to be mirrored by the EU customer making an import declaration. And there will be specific requirements, mainly for agricultural and food goods. So for example, the provision of export health certificates or phytosanitary certificates. Next slide, please. And this is a summary. As I said, we will be sharing this pack later, but this sets out in detail exactly how staging will work. Next slide, please. So of course, what I've been talking about there is trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Between Great Britain and the European Union. Separate arrangements, of course, will apply in terms of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. These are the subjects of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and these are covered by the agreement that was reached between the government and the European Commission in the Joint Committee recently. The ministers are very satisfied with the agreement that was reached. It's it's preserved the vitally important principle of unfettered access for Northern Ireland business to the UK market. It's protected the place in the UK customs territory. It's protected trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and this includes this certification grace period for authorised traders such as supermarkets. And in the longer term, the UK trader scheme to enable people to move goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland without tariffs being incurred because of the risk that these goods then might move into the Republic of Ireland. Next slide, please. And there are certain detailed provisions that were brought in as part of the agreement that we reached with the European Commission, as set out on that slide. And after the agreement, as some of you will have seen, we issued a command paper which described the agreement that was reached, and we are now proceeding to engage in detail with those businesses who are most directly affected, as well as, of course, with the working very closely with the Northern Ireland Executive on this. Next slide, please. And the one final thing I'd say on Northern Ireland is that, in recognition of the fact that that there is not much time for businesses to prepare for the new arrangements, that's why the government has been more interventionist on GB Northern Ireland trade than we have been with GB EU trade, in particular with standing up the trader support service. So the advice that we are giving to people who want to ship goods to Northern Ireland after the end of the transition period is that they should register for the trader support service, which is up and running. Next slide, please, Kyle. So the messages that we're giving out to traders, that there are some basics people will have to get, like an economic operator registration number. HMRC is issuing these automatically to VAT registered businesses, but there are quite a few, like a couple of 100,000, we think, non-VAT registered businesses who therefore do not have EORI numbers, but are expecting or have been trading with the EU. So we're telling people that they need to register online. Next slide, please. So we're also asking people to consider whether they need to engage some form of customs intermediary to help them with this work, because this is, despite our efforts, quite a technically complex regulatory area. We and I'm sure my colleague David can say more about this if required under questions, but we have been working quite hard to providing support to boost capacity in the customs intermediary market. You may have seen the number of 50,000 being named, as in we need 50,000 new customs agents. That's never a number that has come from the government. I think it was somebody projected that this is the kind of order of magnitude that might be needed. HMRC has actually commissioned some work from Ipsos Mori about how the customs intermediary market is doing, and it has shown very encouraging signs of scaling up in capacity, including through innovative ways of working. Although, I mean, of course, we know that this is a big change. There are tensions in the market. We are not complacent. Next slide, please, Kyle. And obviously, if you're trading in products of animal origin, animal byproducts, or chemicals or foodstuffs, then there are certain detailed requirements that people will have to follow. Next slide, please. There is particular rules on VAT and excise, so offering bespoke VAT accounting for imports of goods from the EU, which is explained there, and so rest of the world rules applying to excise goods, so alcohol, tobacco, and so forth. And we've published, and a question that often gets asked, we've published online what the details will be in terms of duty-free shopping. Next slide, please. So let's talk a bit. I mean, there's a lot of planning that's been going on to ensure that problems are as least likely to arise as possible. But we are also getting ready for what some of those issues might be and how to respond to them. So a lot of this focuses on Kent, and of course the country is a lot more than Kent, but Kent is where we think some of the most acute problems could arrive, just because of the sheer volume of trade that flows, and on this the closed loop system around through the port of Dover and through Eurotunnel with roll-on roll-off transit. Because if there are delays there, the system is designed for very high volumes, and even a short delay per shipment could be a major problem. So hence the full-scale Operation Brock traffic management system, which the Department of Transport have been working on in discussion with local Kent partners. Next slide, please. And these are some of the things that we're going to be doing. So the movable concrete barrier on the M20, and you may have heard the phrase lorry parks, which we are not using, but we are creating traffic management sites that can be used to provide extra capacity for holding HGVs if there is congestion at the ports. So it mentioned, for example, it mentions Manston Airfield there. It mentions the new Ashford-Sevington facility, which is actually slightly delayed. It's not going to be available probably until the 1st of February, but that's why we've got a contingency site for Sevington and Ashford Waterbrook. So these plans are well in train for the new year, and we're pretty confident. Next slide, please. So you may have heard about this. The Check-in HGV is ready to cross the border service. At one time, it had a working title of Smart Freight, but according to the rules of gov.uk, good rules, we have to call something what it really is. Very simple concept. Mainly we envisage it working through a smartphone app, that a haulier will be prompted to say, okay, you're moving these goods in this way, you therefore need all the following things. Do you have all of these things? And if you are able to tick yes to all of these, then you will be told, that's great, you have a Kent access permit, you are free to proceed into Kent. And those Kent access permits will be linked into Kent Police. It will be linked to the registration number of a vehicle, and it will be linked into the automatic number plate recognition systems. So the aim is that we stop people who are not ready, because unready trucks could be our biggest problem, from actually crossing into Kent. And we will sometimes, I think there has been sort of accusation, oh, this is all voluntary, people could just tick the boxes and ignore it. Well, no, there will be consequences to that. We've been making very clear that there will be consequences, there will be fines, but also vehicles that try to make their way into Kent without the necessary facilities just will not travel. Next slide, please. So one of the big things that we're doing to help the country get ready for the introduction of controls is in terms of investment in port infrastructure. So just to be clear on the distinction, we, the government, are funding the emergency, well, not emergency sites, the traffic management sites that are needed for January 2021, that will also provide HMRC functions. But beyond that, we launched the Port Infrastructure Fund with £200 million to help ports produce the necessary capacity for the introduction of UK import controls from July. So the fund has the fund has been open. Various ports have bid. You may have seen stories in the press to the effect that one port or another has got or has not got what they wanted. It is true that the decisions have been taken, and we hope to make a proper announcement on that shortly. Next slide, please. yeah, as I said, we will be producing inland sites where we will be carrying out HMRC functions from 1st of January. In particular, this will be for the various transit conventions, in particular the Common Transit Convention, but also the other options that exist. And as it says, for the trade under CITES as well. Next slide, please. Within government, we're going to be setting up, or no, we have set up the Border Operations Centre. Basically, what that will do is that it will pull together all of the different sources of what's happening at the border and how goods are flowing. So we will make sure that this is all. We ask for the data once. We'll put it all in one place, and we will then be best placed to advise ministers and also advise people more broadly on what the situation is, and therefore what, if anything, we need to do. And the Border Operations Centre will use this data visualization tool, the Border Flow Service, which will sort of turn masses of data into actual insight as to what's going on. Next slide, please. Say something about passengers as well, because we've been talking about goods, and the main message is that we are expecting, we have to work on this assumption that that EU member states will apply full third country Schengen controls on people travelling in from the UK, and that has certain implications, such as sort of 6 months on passports. The situation is evolving. So, for example, I think there was some positive news in the press this morning about pets, because there had been a scenario whereby you might have to apply to move your pet 3 months in advance. But I think we've had some progress on that in the last 24 hours. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we, knowledgeable though my colleagues are, we are not the source of every single piece of information this morning. I would very strongly commend to you the border operating model, partly because my team wrote it and I think it's wonderful. This is a very big and substantial document on gov.uk, which is very good for research into exactly what will happen for import, for export, for general regimes, for special regimes, and at the different times. And it's put together in the forms of some really good user journeys. We're putting out a lot of guidance out there on the Northern Ireland Protocol, so people with particular interest in trade with Northern Ireland need to check that. Next slide, please. And we're also offering a range of webinars. So HMRC, for example, are doing very regular webinars to try to get as many people interested as possible. One of the big issues that we have had, but I think that is changing, is getting people to just focus and appreciate it's all massively busy and a difficult time at the moment, but just to get people to dedicate the time to seeing what they need to do for the end of the year, because there is a lot of information out there that we can give. And we have also made available helplines and an online forum. Next slide, please. So some key links there. As I said, you will get these slides, so I'm not going to ask you to memorize these web links. Next slide, please. And let's and that's the end of my presentation. But any questions? I'd also like to welcome my colleague Sharmin Joda, who has now joined us from the Transition Task Force. So let's have a look at the questions. Kyle, perhaps you could take the slide deck down, because I'm trying to. Okay, that's good. I can now see. So we're getting some questions coming in, which we're already putting up answers to, and thank you to people who have put up where they are. That's incredibly helpful. So one question that I wanted to pick up was one about the port infrastructure fund. So the question is, as the fund was so oversubscribed and ports like Dover and Portsmouth have said they can't deliver the required infrastructure with what we've been allocated, are there plans to expand the fund? No, because obviously there's a real balance to be struck here in terms of in terms of the use of public money on this. And I mean, worth emphasising that the general, the general rules, the way they work, is that ports are responsible themselves for building the necessary capacity they need to run their own businesses. But the Port Infrastructure Fund was designed to just provide some help with this, recognising there were some specific things happening in July. But 200 million was allocated, and that there are no plans, as I understand it, to offer more. We will carry on engaging very closely with the ports about that, because I think there's already been sort of very close dialogue. Just looking at other questions coming in. So there's a question about what is happening with bank accounts for expatriates. I should say that unfortunately, the limits of my responsibility are around sort of moving goods across the border, as opposed to more general issues to do with the end of the transition. So unless my colleague Charmin happens to know the answer, I'm afraid we'll just have to take that one away and pick up on that. Let me just carry on going in to the questions. So we've had some good, so thank you very much to my colleagues. We've had some good answers coming up there. Goods for, so there's a question from someone called S. Goods for inland border facilities don't have to go through border control points. How will they be tracked? I mean, I think, but I'd ask David Vallely to expand on this if I get it wrong. That there is a general point that HMRC carries out enforcement on a sort of risk and intelligence basis. We make clear what people need to do when they're bringing goods into the country, and we set out sort of what needs to be declared. What we have never done, and what we are not going to start doing, is literally stopping every single thing coming in and tracking it. But we obviously are very alive to the risks of smuggling, and HMRC are very seasoned in terms of enforcement. But David, do feel free to chip in if there is anything else you want to add to that.
Just a little bit, but everything you've covered there, Tom, is correct, as you say.
Okay.
We have our existing compliance strategy of risk and intelligence based checks. With regards to the inland border facilities, there was announcements last week, I believe it was on Monday, of the locations of these, but there will also be an app in development to communicate with the hauliers that need to attend these facilities of where they need to go. So hopefully that adds a little bit more to those inland border facilities for you.
Yes, David, thank you very much. So there's a question from the office of Anne-Marie Trevelyan from Emily Knight. For Irish companies who ordinarily export goods to the rest of the EU via the UK, will there be a separate system to avoid the queues for UK exports? So understanding is not a separate system. Now this is the land bridge, isn't it? I don't know which of my colleagues can talk about how we see the land bridge operating. Look at maybe Matt or Alan. But if not, if we can come back on that. I mean, my plan is, my understanding is that there will not be separate lanes, but there will be. But what we are working is to make the whole operation of transit via the land bridge as smooth as possible, so that this should not be a cause of delay.
I can come in a little bit here,
sure,
Tom. As you say, it's not necessarily a case of perhaps avoiding the queues, but to perhaps raise awareness of the Common Transit Convention, as you kind of alluded to there with regards to transit, that to avoid not necessarily needing to do customs formalities from Ireland into the UK and then from the UK into EU again, you know, that's almost double declarations, that there is the Common Transit Convention that allows goods to pass through other customs territories without needing to be formally declared into free circulation. And from January, GVMS, I think was mentioned earlier in the slide pack that was being developed, that will be ready as of January to facilitate the Office of Transit function that's required when that transit movement enters a new customs territory. So for this land bridge example, perhaps going from Dublin to Holyhead and then down through Dover into Calais, you'd start the transit movement in Ireland in free circulation. It would then complete the Office of Transit function at Holyhead. That movement then continues through the UK and into the mainland EU, where it can then be declared into either, again, free circulation as EU goods. I think they're called either T1 or T2. I can never remember which one's which when it comes to transit. And then they keep their union status without becoming UK goods, if that helps to answer that a little bit. It's assuming what the question was about slightly, but that's kind of a facilitation. It's pre-existing transit, but it's something that may be able to help facilitate the flow of goods from the Republic of Ireland to mainland EU.
Tom, I'm happy to cover the bit about queues if they're
yes,
going
please.
via Kent. Certainly, if they are travelling via Eurotunnel or Dover, so going into Kent, they will need to access check and HGV is ready and will need to get a Kent access permit. So if they're travelling that route, they will definitely need it. If they're going to Europe via any routes outside Kent, they won't.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. That's great. I mean, obviously, as you know, I keep saying this, we are not, well, we are a little bit obsessed with Kent because Kent is the area where we think there is a risk of serious and sustained disruption if people try to sort of travel unready. Although we are hoping that the check and HGV service will help with that. Obviously, we are not complacent about other ports, and obviously we're watching quite carefully. Department of Transport are what's been happening, for example, with the containers at Felixstowe, but we do not see that as being of the same scope for serious and sustained disruption as a result of the end of the transition period. David, could I possibly, you don't need to answer it immediately, but perhaps I could draw your attention to a question from Caris Lloyd about the imports of controlled and non-controlled goods after 1st of January, and specifically controlled goods that are in the pipeline and how this works with Chief. I won't put you on the spot orally, but I'll draw your attention to that. I wanted to pick up the question from Tim Sampson from Dr. Luke Evans's office. Thank you. Basically, Tim asks, is there a plan for an MP helpline specifically for MP staff to raise operational issues? I'm not aware that there is. There's a question about will we be able to circulate updates on particular operational issues around MP offices and similar. I think that's a very interesting idea that we will take away. I'm not sure how much thinking we've done on it. I know that departments such as HMRC and DEFRA do have particular arrangements for MPs as it is, which we probably want to piggyback on. Let me see. Oh, yes, thank you very much for the question from Joe Churchill's office. The protocol for thoroughbred horses crossing several countries for breeding or racing. Ian, as I speak, an answer appears. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian. What other questions have we got? Very grateful to my colleagues because I think we are picking them up. I'm also sort of very pleased that this is being useful, and we will absolutely look for, as well as sharing this deck, we can see if we can share answers to these questions. And I think that what I would say is that there are quite a lot of frequently asked questions online, so I direct people, and Kyle, if we can circulate the links as part of this, to there is an HMRC forum which covers all of the HMRC customs transition related issues, and there is also a broader government forum where people can post questions and get answers. So I'd encourage people to direct constituents to those forums and also use it as a sort of quarry of answers yourselves. Let me just see if there are any other questions coming in. I cannot see any other questions coming in. Do any of my colleagues want to say anything? No pressure, in addition to anything I've said in my introductory remarks.
Tom,
hi.
Can I just, Charmin, were you looking to come in?
Yes, I was. Hi, Tom. Hello, everybody. Apologies. I was indeed having technical issues earlier. My name's Charmin Jorda from the Transition Task Force. I'm the Director of Business Readiness. Tom may have covered some of this, but essentially my team is working with government departments, so Tom's team and others, on how we support businesses across the UK. So working very closely, and we know that once an announcement is made, I think my slide had announcements overview or negotiations update, but I think if you watch BBC News or any news channel, you've probably got as much of an update as we can give you, unfortunately, at this point, but hopefully in the coming days we will do. But we're working very closely with departments, and I know departments are ready to go in terms of more direct and intense communications and engagement. Our comms programme will intensify. There's a lot that we're doing and would like to do on guidance and making sure that we update that on gov.uk. There are a number of tools, and Tom's just mentioned a couple of the forum already. There is a slide in this pack that has links to certain pages that will hopefully be helpful. You should hopefully by now have had through the Whip's office an MP's toolkit as well. That's also got an email address for our business partnerships team, where MP's offices can also get in touch if there's any more information that you need. Please do, let us know, engage with us. It's really important that we hear from businesses, individuals, your offices. We want to make sure that we're directing the communications, the guidance in the right way, and that it's useful. We also run a Brexit business task force, which the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Michael Gove, chairs, and we have those on various sector themes, and we have a lot of SMEs come to those, as well as the business representative organisations, and we've had those on services, on agri-food, on trader readiness, so a lot of the things that you would expect, manufacturing, for example. So we are gathering all of that intelligence feedback. and working with departments on those. And our campaign will continue well into next year as well, into June. We know, we're not disappearing on the 31st of December. So please do keep coming back to us and let us know how we can help.
Great. Thank you very much, Charmaine. So I am looking at
Hi,
whether
Tom. I was just going to come in on
David, yeah, sure,
Lloyd's question, just because there's a few bits to this question. I thought it was perhaps easier to do verbally than what would be quite a long bit of text, but I'll also pop a few bits in. So with regards to the first part of what happens with controlled goods in the pipeline using the EMCS that hit customs after the 1st of January, we are preparing guidance on what is referred to as goods in flight. So those goods that leave before leave in 2020 but arrive in 2021, and that guidance will be published shortly and should cover everything around that. Do we use Chief platform for non-controlled goods? For the non-controlled goods, you do have that choice to delay that supplementary declaration or make the full declaration at the point of entry, and yes, that is into Chief. So what are the obligations of European suppliers for controlled goods after 1st of January? They currently input into EMCS. So for excise, and I'll pop this in the chat afterwards, for excise, broadly the rest of the world rules will apply. So for what I'm not a particular excise expert, but whatever obligations are on that European supplier would be the same as what would have been on a rest of world supplier as of today. And with regards to fast track for Chief application processes, we have been doing a lot of work on all our application processes to streamline and make those as quick and easy as possible. I can't comment specifically on Chief, but kind of across the board that has been something many stakeholders have raised with us, and we have been trying to expedite as much as possible those processes because we know how important they'll be. I'll try and put a few of those bits in a written reply, but I thought it was a little easier to go through verbally as there were a number of questions in there.
David, that's great. Thank you very much. We also have another question from Anonymous, which is about the risk to constituents who have parts on a particular HGV together with parts for other companies. And the risk is that even if you've done everything you need to do, your shipment might get delayed because other people on the HGV haven't. Is there anything you wanted to say about that? I guess it sort of comes down to the haulier's responsibility for making sure that they have the necessary, that they've done the necessary for everything that they're carrying.
Yes, pretty much, and it is again an issue we are aware of. It's what's broadly referred to as consolidated loads, where it can be a number of different types of goods, which of course may have different levels of, as we've discussed, our compliance approach in the past, risk and intelligence based. So when we do appreciate there may be a bit of a change to this with regards to having high risk goods with low risk goods, that each one will have an impact on the potential for that load being delayed. But yeah, it's something we're aware of, and it's one that we're trying to work out the easiest solution to. But it's not something we necessarily have particular advice on, because this does then come down to the commercial relationships of those businesses between perhaps the importer and the haulier, and of course all of these things have financial and commercial consequences as these consolidated loads have developed over the years to help efficiencies. So no specific advice, but just kind of reassurance that it is something we are aware of and trying to resolve as best we can.
Okay, thank you very much. And I can see one further question, which is not related to the board, have I picked up, that this is from the Office of Chloe Smith MP. Do we know whether the furlough scheme could be accessed by businesses impacted by Brexit disruption? Now, my understanding is that the furlough scheme, the furlough scheme is related to actions that companies take as opposed to the causes for these actions. So if people are furloughing, then they meet the requirements of the scheme, then they can do that. There is certainly, as I understand it, no plans for a specific Brexit reduction related furlough. So the furlough scheme will run for as long as it runs, but we can check that. I think we have exhausted all of your questions so far.
I know I'm coming in a lot on these, Tom.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
A little bit on that final one on the furlough scheme. Though not specifically the furlough scheme, there is something called CBIL, and I'm trying to just look up the acronym, what that acronym stands for. And it is the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which is there to kind of help businesses that have been impacted on that and support businesses that have been kind of affected by the wider COVID-19 pandemic. And this may also kind of have impacted on those preparing to make customs declarations. So it is something that, as you say, Tom, if you're eligible, then it's worth having a look at as well.
Great. All right. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. Thanks for the kind comments saying that this was useful, and also thank you for the reminder that it will be that you will have constituents kind of on your backs in the new year and looking to get answers. So we definitely need to just make sure that we have our arrangements in place for helping you help your constituents in the new year. And with that, and with big thanks to my colleagues for fielding the questions, Kyle, I think we can close it there.